the story of the Soviet Union is one of the most dramatic, ideologically charged, and world-shaping tales of the 20th century. It begins in the ashes of a crumbling empire and ends with the fall of a superpower that once aimed to reshape all of humanity. The USSR, formerly the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, existed from 1922 to 1991. In that span of just under 70 years, it went from a revolutionary experiment to a global colossus, and finally, to a system overwhelmed by its contradictions and broken promises. It all starts with Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. In 1917, Russia was in chaos. The First World War had devastated the Russian Empire. The February Revolution overthrew the Tsar and established a shaky provisional government. But by October, Lenin and his Bolsheviks seized power in a coup they called a revolution. Lenin wasn't just overthrowing a government, he was declaring war on capitalism itself. He promised peace, land, and bread. What came was civil war. The Russian Civil War pitted the Reds, Bolsheviks, against the Whites, a loose coalition of monarchists, liberals, and foreign invaders. The Bolsheviks won, at enormous cost. Famine, terror, and purges accompanied the victory. To survive the chaos, Lenin instituted war communism, an emergency economy of rationing, forced requisitions, and state control. When the war ended, the economy was in ruins. Lenin shifted gears with the new economic policy, NEP, a strategic retreat from pure communism. It allowed some private enterprise, small markets, and peasant trade. It was meant to be temporary. Lenin said, "We're taking one step back to later take 2 steps forward." But Lenin never saw the long game. In 1924, he died after years of strokes. His death triggered a brutal power struggle. The main contenders, Leon Trotsky, the fiery orator and head of the Red Army, versus Joseph Stalin, the quiet bureaucrat, general secretary of the party. Stalin was underestimated. He used his role to consolidate support, isolate rivals, and eventually exile Trotsky, who would later be assassinated in Mexico. By the late 1920s, Stalin was in total control. His reign marked the USSR's transformation into a totalitarian state. The first 5-year plan was launched in 1928. It aimed for rapid industrialization and collectivization of agriculture. Cities grew, steel, coal, and electricity outputs surged. But on the countryside, it was a bloodbath. Stalin ordered the forced collectivization of farms, leading to mass resistance. Millions of peasants were killed or sent to gulags. In Ukraine, this process helped cause the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions. Meanwhile, Stalin purged his own party. In the Great Purge of the 1930s, countless communist officials, military leaders, scientists, artists, and ordinary citizens were arrested, tortured, executed, or vanished into labor camps. Stalin's paranoia knew no limits. Loyalty was never enough. Confession was extracted under duress. Show trials paraded broken men on false charges. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, became a tool of terror. Yet during this same time, the USSR industrialized at an astonishing rate. In a single generation, it went from a backward agrarian economy to a world power. Soviet propaganda declared Stalin the father of nations. He became untouchable. Then came World War II. In 1939, Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, a non-aggression treaty that secretly carved up Eastern Europe. The USSR invaded eastern Poland, the Baltics, and parts of Finland. But in 1941, Hitler betrayed Stalin and launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. The USSR was caught off guard. The Nazis marched deep into Soviet territory. But the Soviet people endured unspeakable suffering. Cities like Leningrad were starved. Stalingrad became the turning point, a brutal, months-long battle that ended with the German Sixth Army's surrender. By 1945, Soviet troops took Berlin. The cost? an estimated 27 million Soviet lives. In the aftermath of the war, the USSR emerged as a superpower, controlling Eastern Europe and opposing the capitalist West in a new kind of war, the Cold War. Stalin established communist regimes in Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain fell. East Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria all came under Moscow's control. The KGB replaced the NKVD as the new secret police. Dissent was crushed, surveillance was total. After Stalin's death in 1953, power passed briefly to Lavrenti Beria, but he was arrested and executed. Eventually, Nikita Khrushchev rose to power. In 1956, Khrushchev shocked the world with his secret speech, denouncing Stalin's crimes and beginning a period known as de-Stalinization. Statues came down, Gulag survivors were released, a cultural thaw began. But Khrushchev was erratic. He launched ambitious projects like the Virgin Lands campaign to boost agriculture and the space program, which achieved global prestige with Sputnik in 1957 and Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight in 1961. But his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was seen as a humiliation. In 1964, he was quietly removed by party elites. He was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev, who brought stability but stagnation. The 1970s are often seen as the USSR's peak of power: massive military, nuclear parity with the US, global influence. But under the surface, the system was rotting. Corruption, inefficiency, a black market economy, and falling productivity undermined the socialist dream. Dissent was once again repressed, with figures like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Andrei Sakharov silenced or exiled. The USSR invaded Afghanistan in 1979, aiming to support a communist government. It became the Soviet Vietnam, a decade-long war that drained resources and morale. Meanwhile, technology lagged, the economy stalled, shelves were empty, life was grey. After Brezhnev's death in 1982, a brief game of musical chairs followed. Yuri Andropov died in 1984, Konstantin Chernenko in 1985. Then came Mikhail Gorbachev. He was young, reformist, and idealistic. He introduced perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, openness. He tried to revive socialism by allowing criticism, decentralization, and limited market mechanisms. But instead of saving the system, Gorbachev's reforms exposed its failure. Eastern Bloc countries began to fall. In 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. One by one, communist regimes collapsed. Gorbachev refused to use force. Nationalist movements surged across the USSR. In 1991, a failed coup by hardliners aimed to reverse reforms, but it collapsed within days. The final blow came in December 1991. The Bellavazia Accords declared the end of the USSR. Gorbachev resigned. The red flag was lowered from the Kremlin. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. It was gone. 15 republics born from its wreckage. Russia inherited its nuclear arsenal, its debts, and its scars. The USSR left behind an enormous legacy: victory over Nazism, the space race, rapid industrialization, and advances in science and education, but also purges, famines, gulags, mass censorship, and authoritarianism. It was a system built on a dream, a classless, stateless, just society. But that dream was compromised from the very start. It substituted democratic revolution with one-party rule, substituted workers' councils with a centralized bureaucracy, and substituted equality with hierarchy in the name of progress. For nearly 70 years, the USSR was an empire of paradoxes: brutal and utopian, industrial and dysfunctional, feared and admired. It terrified the West, inspired the global South, and shaped the lives of hundreds of millions. Its fall was not just the end of a government, it was the end of an idea that once claimed it could remake the world. And in its ruins, we still argue over what the Soviet Union truly was: a failed promise or a necessary warning.